Did the Obama administration supply arms to the terrorist group holding more than 200 girls hostage in Africa? Well, some political observers believe military aid provided to Libyan rebels may have found their way to the organization. In Nigeria, the militant group Boko Haram kidnapped 276 girls in April. President Hollande of France is urging coordinated efforts among nations to strike at the group, which has killed thousands of people in recent years. Nigeria's army is ill-equipped to take on the terrorist forces. Ajamu Baraka is a fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies and has written extensively on Africa. Recently, the author wrote From Benghazi to Boko Haram, Why I Support the Benghazi Inquiry. Baraka is our guest on the show today. He's here to talk to us about Boko Haram and the missing girls. We'll also discuss the war in Libya and how American armaments may have fallen into the hands of the terrorist group. Finally, we'll examine what might just happen to the girls and the region in the very near future. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So who exactly is behind the Boko Haram?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Clearly it's an indigenous force in northern Nigeria, stemming from a long and legitimate concerns around the relative neglect of that part of the country. But we also know that this organization has links with some very nefarious elements outside of Nigeria. In my article, I talk about the fact that one can't really understand this organization and its sort of emerges out of nowhere without making the proper links, in particular the link between its growing military capacity and the destruction of the Libyan state from a few years ago.
So just how dangerous is this group? They've gone ahead and they've kidnapped hundreds of girls. What's the history there?
Well, the history is that Boko Haram has connections with some very powerful political forces in northern Nigeria. It started off primarily as a political movement, but it quickly turned to a more radical military posture. As a consequence, some people argue of the heavy-handed response from the Nigerian authorities that attempted to suppress the movement and ended up, even according to organizations like Amnesty International, committing some very heinous human rights violations. But Boko Haram also has its capacity strengthened as a consequence of its connections with Al-Qaeda elements, training that it's received in places like Mali, equipment that apparently has fallen into its hands from the weapons that were transferred from Libya to Syria and ended up in the hands of various organizations like Boko Haram throughout northern Africa.
Well, I want to get to that in a minute, but what exactly does the group intend to gain from these kidnappings? Well,
their fight is basically they want to overthrow the Nigerian government and to impose Sharia law throughout the entire state. And they've been involved in a number of these kinds of activities, this one being the more dramatic one, of course.
So how exactly did the arms from the United States find their way to Boko Haram?
Well, that's not completely clear, but we know that a number of Al-Qaeda-linked organizations ended up having access to some of those arms because the arms were transferred in mass quantities, and there was no real control over those arms falling into the hands of more radical forces. Of course, the U.S. authorities said that they weren't really directly involved at first, they claimed, and that the arms that were transferred from places like Saudi Arabia were going to, quote unquote, moderate forces inside Syria. But it's been clear that those arms have gotten into the hands of Boko Haram and other organizations. But it's important to point out that we can't we're not making a claim that Boko Haram will not have the capacity it has today without having access to those arms.
So let's talk about NATO's involvement in Libya, and how did it affect other nations in Africa outside of Nigeria?
The destruction of the Libyan state in the increased aggressive posture on the part of the U.S. authorities, primarily operating through their African Command, or AFRICOM. As a consequence of the destabilization that occurred across the continent, primarily the northern part of the continent, in Mali, now in the Central African Republic, in Niger, and in northern Nigeria, we see that there's been a spillover effect from what occurred in Libya. And as a consequence of the destabilization, we find that the U.S. and the French have become much more militarily aggressive in Africa, to the detriment, we believe, to the detriment of African people inside the continent.
Are we going to see some sort of U.S. intervention now, another reason, another escalation for military forces to be used against this group?
Well, we already see U.S. intervention in order to provide quote-unquote assistance. And we suspect that the intervention will be much deeper as the weeks draw on. We're concerned because when you have statements made by people like Senator John McCain that says that if the U.S. Understood where those girls were, that they should send their special forces into the country, whether or not the Nigerian authorities approved of it or not. It demonstrates again the kind of disrespect that U.S. authorities have for the sovereignty and independence of various states. And also it raises questions in terms of the real intent of U.S. policy in Nigeria.
I mean, is it America's role to go and rescue these children?
No, it's not. But, you know, you have a campaign that was launched, a very legitimate campaign expressing concerns, the Bring Back Our Girls campaign, that nicely dovetailed in terms of U.S. interests, because there's always been a desire on the part of the U.S. authorities to be more deeply entrenched in the internal politics and the military situation in Nigeria. But you have people who are calling for direct U.S. intervention as the global policeman, if you will.
Has that campaign from the White House backfired at all?
Well, the campaign, we need to make the point out, was an indigenous campaign. It stemmed from Nigerians themselves, but it became a worldwide campaign. It's questionable to me, you know, why this particular incident, as horrendous as it was, received the kind of attention from Western media outlets. When you compare that to, for example, the neglect and complete absence of awareness many people have when it comes to something like what's unfolding in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where more than 6 million people have lost their lives since the 1990s. The whole villages were captured by U.S. Connected militias, and women raped and murdered. You wonder why that situation has been absent from the news, but yet we have our attention focused on the situation in northern Nigeria.
Do you believe that American troops will make their way to direct intervention?
I think there are going to be American troops on the ground, and our understanding is that there are trainers on the ground already in Nigeria.
Do you believe that perhaps the weaponry that has been funneled to this group by the way of Libya could actually be used, American weapons be used against American forces there then?
That's a possibility, but again, we're not going to make the claim that the weaponry that the Boko Haram has can be primarily laid at the feet of Libya. There are some weapons that, in fact, got into their hands. The thing that really increased the capacity of Boko Haram was more so the training and the money that was provided to them by one of the main sources was the main source of Wahhabist financing from Saudi Arabia, one of the main U.S. allies. So those funds, the training that they received in Mali, the political support they've gotten from various Al-Qaeda connected outlets has increased their capacity. So that's the real issue there.
Did the Obama administration take any safeguard to prevent the training or the prevention of weapons that were sent to those rebels from falling into the wrong hands?
Well, they couldn't really, once you start aligning yourself with Islamic fundamentalists, and when they did this in Benghazi, Libya, when they provided direct support to the Libyan Islamic fighting group as the main force that overthrew Muammar Gaddafi, that process spins out of control. The same thing that's happened in Syria. That basically you try to use Al Qaeda as your quote unquote boots on the ground. You can't really control what you're going to receive. There's blowback potential always when you connect yourself to these kinds of nefarious forces. So
what you're saying is that the White House armed Al Qaeda?
We're suggesting that U.S. Authorities, U.S. Military and intelligence sources were involved in providing support, indirect support, to not just Boko Haram, but to a number of these Al Qaeda connected organizations throughout North Africa and in the so-called Middle East. There's no question about that.
So then why would the West, why would the White House align itself with these rebels?
Operation Chaos. That if you want to have more direct intervention, military intervention into these various countries, that basically if a chaotic situation has been produced, a security concern created, then you have an entry point into these various countries. The same reason why the French backed the overthrow of the president in the Central African Republic. President, they ended up a movement that had Al Qaeda related forces that they couldn't control once they took power, and then the French had to directly intervene. Well, some people argue it was in the French, it was in France's interest to be more heavily involved in the Central African Republic. That's happening throughout the African continent. So they have always wanted to have a stronger presence in Nigeria. And my argument is that one of their main concerns is to be able to entrench themselves into the southern part of Africa, Nigeria, where most of the petroleum is located.
We bring up petroleum. So how does the petroleum industry affect the situation?
Well, indirectly, you understand that Nigeria is the number one trading partner in terms of petroleum. And that you have not only Shell, but you have ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Texaco in Nigeria. You have an insurgency in the southern part of Nigeria where they are, and then off the coast, where these companies are losing something like $6 billion, some people say up to $12 billion a year as the consequence of that insurgency through sabotage and through petroleum theft. So they have a security concern in that sense. They also have another concern. They want to block the inroads, the political inroads being made by the Chinese. And the further entrenchment and control of Nigeria, a country of 170 million people, is not a bad objective to have.
Now, obviously, the kidnapping of these girls is a tragedy, and my heart goes out to them and the families affected there. Do we have any word on their health, their safety, the care they've been given, if any?
Of course not. No, those young girls have been probably dispersed. Some people say that they're probably in Cameroon. And no word at this point. If that kind of information was coming out, we would know about some type of military action to try to free those girls. My concern is that because of the posture taken out by the Nigerian authorities, I believe as a consequence of influence coming from the U.S., a no negotiation posture, I think it's going to be very unlikely, unfortunately, I think, that those girls are going to come back alive. Let's hope that I'm wrong.
So you believe that the outcome is very grim for these girls?
Grim if the Nigerians maintain a posture of no negotiation, if there's going to be a position that they're not going to make any kind of exchanges. You're dealing with a force, it's Boko Haram, that has demonstrated its ruthlessness and is lack of fear of dying. So what's going to be the result? A military assault? If that happens, they're going to probably end up executing those young girls.
So if the Nigerian government has a no negotiation policy in place, does that force the international community to take action?
My point is this. The Nigerian government has, in fact, negotiated with Boko Haram before. There have been exchanges.
So they're choosing to not negotiate in this situation, then?
My argument is that this posture is primarily being influenced, I think, by the U.S.
And that's so that the West takes a deeper root into a deeper interest into this.
Well, it's a theory in terms of how you combat so-called terrorism, that you don't negotiate because that's only going to embolden the terrorists. Now, you can take that position if you want, even though most states that take that position, including the U.S., still involve themselves in backdoor negotiations. If you take that posture, then you have to be willing to deal with the possible consequences. In this case, the possibility that these young women would not be allowed to leave alive.